We are now live. Yes, we have made it to the big time.
All right.
Cool. We got somebody in the chat just saying, "Good to see you, Dark Knight Nation." Good to see you too, man. Thank you for showing up. I think with that, we can just kind of get into it, man. So for everybody watching, I want to say a big welcome to Behind the Panel here on Dark Knight Nation. I'm very glad to welcome back the one, the only, your favorite guy on Twitter and mine, the Obi-Wan of comics, Bryan Edward Hill. It is so good to have you back on, man.
Well, good to be here. Always a pleasure talking to you, man. It's a good vibe, you know. I'm all about finding the good energy and stuff. You know,
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I appreciate the energy you keep, man. It's good, it's positive. And anytime there's a place for me, I'm happy to be here.
Well, I mean, we're glad to have you here. That's the thing, man. I honestly, these last 2 years or so of following you and talking to you, I can honestly say I've reshaped a lot of how I interact with people in like this space, but also as a whole, and even the way I approach my sort of creative outlets, for sure. I mean, and you know, not to get too far into the state of the world, I think that's something that a lot of people should be taking into consideration, like the way that you sort of champion being Obi-Wan, you know, in a world that looks and feels like Mustafar 24/7.
It can get real. Well, look, you know, like when I was younger, I was an intense dude. For like a lot of reasons, man. I grew up poor. I was in St. Louis, Missouri. I was a scholarship kid, right? So everyone had more money than me. Had a lot of shame around that, and you know, like the fear that you wouldn't really be able to turn into anything, and you know, I was going to wind up pumping gas no matter what, or I'd be like that one guy with the cubicle job and the Spider-Man tie, like that. That was where I was going to get. Like, oh yeah, no, Brian's cool. You should reprioritize the current reports with him because he likes Nintendo, right? So, and I didn't want to do that, but I had a lot of fear about if I was able to become what I wanted to be, which was, kind of a storyteller, right? Like it was always in my head. And that fear made me kind of mad a lot, because the fear kind of makes, the anger makes the fear go away. Or at least it feels like it goes away. So you like replace one thing with the other thing, right?
Yeah.
And I just had a lot of intense years where I was pretty combative for a long time. And just to be frank, I'm kind of successful now, right? So like, maybe about like a year and a half ago or maybe 2 years ago, I don't remember when it was, but I kind of woke up one day and realized that the things I was afraid of, I don't have to be afraid of anymore.
Yeah.
Like that, I'm not motivated by that anymore. Only thing I haven't done that I want to do is direct a feature. And that's in process, both at an independent level and like at a studio level, right? So it's eventually going to happen whether or not I pull the trigger on my indie feature or I can get the studio to, finance, the thing. But even that changed because technology made it easier to do. It wasn't like, used to be you couldn't really make anything unless you had a huge, metric ton of money. But now, you can still take some money, but you could like scrimp up and save and get it together and make something, right?
Yeah. The space is definitely changing in the favor of independently funding your own creative projects, which is a really exciting advent.
Yeah, for sure, right? So you can make it happen, and that means that I don't have to worry about that anymore either, right? So like I'm just not in a place where I'm scared.
Right.
And I think that makes it easier for me to be easier to deal with because it's easy to let things roll off, right? I kind of feel like I'm in the bonus round of a career. Like they could just turn the switch off right now. I'm good. I wrote Batman. I worked on a superhero show. I have a movie that I wrote that got produced in January that's going to come out.
That's awesome.
So, once you get to that place where no one can say you wasted your time, you wasted your life, whatever, like there's just no point in running around being so tight, And on Twitter, it just gets so crazy, like so fast, right? And I don't really understand the psychology of someone that sees someone say something and is like, well, I need to now argue with you about it. Like I call you a name because you think differently than me. And it's, like that's not really how I like to spend my time.
Well, I think, to be honest, that's one of the reasons why I click with you and the way that you carry yourself, is because you obviously have your own set of values and your own set of beliefs, but you're a very moderate thinker, and it comes through a lot in your work. I mean, one of the things that I love the most about reading your work is that you're using the tools that comics, that fiction, that whatever specific genre you're deciding to play in, to tell stories about people, to tell stories about how complex we are individually and as a macrocosm, on our earth and in our society. But you find a really great way to say what you want to say without condemning either side of the political spectrum. You bring to light both the strengths and the weaknesses of either side, and then you pursue your point, which I think is really, really important. And it's something that not a lot of people do, both in their kind of public social sphere or in the creative sphere.
Oh, for sure. Did I mute myself? I don't know which button did I play. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay,
you're
so
good.
I must press different button. Okay. Well, I mean, look, I'm pretty liberal, but at the same time, I do believe in balance, and like the kind of the philosophy of yin and yang, and just when it comes to things like, not to go deep into politics, but when it comes just to like the polemics, right? Like conservative on one side, liberal on the other side. I do think there's a function in having the two interact. I think that you have, kind of the space that I normally live in, just kind of ethically and politically, is incredibly permissive, and I don't find institutions precious. I don't feel like we need to protect them. I don't have a dogmatic view of America or any of those things. I'm very fluid with it, right? But I do see the point in also having a force that is more dogmatic about it, right? That's just more like conservative in the sense of constriction, right? To prevent things from going too far, right? And I think that balance of forces is utilitarian, right? There's not necessarily compromise, but there is a kind of a synthesis of thought that can come from that I think can be useful. The problem now I see is things have become so tribal, where you have to just completely throw away everybody on the other side of the aisle, whatever the other side of the aisle is, and you can still preserve your own ethics and your philosophy while engaging with someone who thinks differently than you, right? But it's not easy, but it's useful to do, and so I try to keep that in mind. And then more in a broad sense, I don't know anything. I am not wise, I can't say I mastered a thing, right?
I forget who says it, and I'm gonna butcher the quote, more paraphrase it, but there's the saying that true wisdom is being open and honest enough to admit when you don't know something more than it is, and calling yourself out for it. So I think that that's really important. And, in pretty much every sphere of the world, I think discourse is important. I think obviously you'll always find extremities on either side that push those ideologies way too far and maybe aren't worth the time of day to have the conversation with. But largely, I mean, our country and I think our society as a whole is kind of built on discourse. It's built on people being able to find a common ground. And, there are certain things that need to be disrupted in order for change to happen. But I certainly don't think it means that the nature of sitting down, and having a conversation over drinks is something that should go away. One of my best friends is super, super liberal. And when I met him, I would say I was a little bit more leaning conservative. Now I'd consider myself very, very in the middle. But we always had great conversation. And, he's one of my closest friends. And even though our political ideologies didn't exactly match, those conversations continue today, years later. And I think we're both all the better for it.
Well, it's kind of like Star Trek, right? Like, I want to know what Spock thinks. I may not agree with it, but I want to know. and McCoy's going to have his own thing, and Sulu's going to have his own thing, right? Go next generation. Getting a Klingon perspective is useful. But I might also want to talk to Deanna Troi and find out what she has to say, right? And I think we're all sort of the captain of our own starship in a way, and we ultimately have to make decisions for our lives that we feel are best for us and the world around us. But it's good to harness different opinion, right? But it's not really about having a dialogue. It's just about how combative can the interactions be, and I am not a master of anything, right? So I was telling someone on Twitter today, I don't tell people what to think. I try to give people a place to think, And if I say something on social media, as long as you're being polite, I'm happy to engage, and say, okay, well, I might think this certain politician is a lunatic, and someone else might, think that they're the best, politician that they've had in their lifetime. Right. Okay. Well, you're coming from two very different places, which is interesting to me, and because we live in the same place, but we have an incredibly different perspective on kind of what the nature of the place is and what's worth protecting and what's threatening it and what's not. And I'm kind of fascinated by all that. And I think that comes also from storytelling, man. I can't judge the characters I write. So if I'm writing Ra's al Ghul in The Outsiders, I can't sit there and dwell on how wrong he is. I have to write him as a person.
Yeah.
Even if you're writing the Joker, I have never actually written the Joker, strangely enough, but even if you're writing the Joker, you have to figure out something real about it to you. I manifest in one-liners and cool things, and I'll make a pencil disappear in somebody's head and all that stuff. But it starts in a real place. And I think that's also because I work with actors a lot. And actors can't play, a concept. They have to play a person. And an actor is always going to ask you, why am I doing this? I don't, and you can't tell them, well, because the story needs you to blow up the school bus because of the whatever. You need to give the actor a reason, right? You got to think through it so they can invest into it and play it, And so I think working in that storytelling discipline has trained me out of labeling and ostracizing people who think differently than me, and trained me to seek to understand, how could two people look at the same thing and see something incredibly different, right? That's really fascinating to me, and it's something I kind of explore a lot in my own life and in my storytelling as well.
Yeah, I certainly see that, and I think that actually that conversation was a sort of perfect segue into talking about American Carnage, which was an incredible series that you did for DC Vertigo starting in late 2018, going into 2019. And for my money, I think it's one of the most important comics to discuss, especially for today's climate. And it does very much embody a lot of what we're talking about. You're giving the reader a place for them to sort of observe the landscape of the world in a political sense, in a social sense, and also sort of the infrastructure, right? Which is something that's been brought up a lot in today's society, how, our society has kind of, and again, the infrastructure of our country is setting up various forces to look down upon certain groups of people. And American Carnage, I think, very perfectly displays that, because the villain is very much against being the sort of air horn with their politics. They're underground. They are attacking everything from the root. And I think that that's especially prevalent. And if I might say, and for those watching, they know that, obviously I'm a very critical reader, and I'm never afraid to even identify stories by writers that I might not be fond of the work, but I might be a huge fan of them. I mean, I've given many hard reviews to other writers, and I'm using that as a setup to say this. I think that American Carnage was easily one of the most important and one of the best books of this past decade. And I mean that truly. Just the amount of nuance in the storytelling and the characterization, and particularly something, and I know I'm kind of unloading a bunch of things on you right now, that I love is how smart the dialogue is, it accomplishes so much, and it's something that I don't think comic book writers are often paying enough attention to, and it's something that I think might stem from your involvement in television and in film, but it does a lot, especially in American Carnage. You set it up in a way that it helps roll out exposition in a digestible manner. It reveals character, it reveals the world. And again, I apologize, I'm unloading a lot on you right now, but American Carnage to me is a very important story. And it says a lot about the world. And again, I think it really ties into the conversation we were just having prior. And so, and I know you put a lot of yourself into that book, and part of it, knowing that I know that you're from the St. Louis area, and your protagonist, Richard Wright, was also from the St. Louis area. And I think that he kind of, being someone of both black and white descent, I think is a sort of an embodiment of a lot of these conflicting ideals that the world is sort of embodying right now. So yeah, sorry, I know again I went off on that, but if
thank you for saying that. And look, first, let me just credit Leandro, Fernandez and Dean White and Pat Rousseau on letters, Dean White on colors, because they really helped the nuance and the subtlety of the whole experience, right? Like I couldn't have done that without them kind of doing what they did, and then they would influence the way I would write it and so on and so forth. It's certainly not just a journey of one in that book. Yeah, I don't know, man. I'll just be totally transparent. Like, I rarely deal head on with racial issues in my work. I just never have traditionally.
Yeah.
And the reason I haven't is I always felt that if I did, I would be that writer.
Yeah.
Right. And then whenever you wanted to deal with racial animus, I would get the phone call. But if you wanted to tell a story about Green Lantern, I wouldn't. If you wanted to do John Wick, I wouldn't. Right. And I always felt like it would just be this gravitational pull that would just, I would only get calls in February or something. And I've always resisted that because I never wanted to be, just that. I wanted to be someone that, that, Bryan could write the Terminator, and he doesn't have to write the Terminator about, race relations and a Terminator is in it. Like, he can write a Terminator story, right? So I avoided it for a long, long time. And, by the time I started American Carnage, I felt like I had done enough work that it would be part of a library of work and not something that would just define me, as a writer. Like, it's funny. I mean, I think like the two things that can define you most if you write about them are race relations and sexuality, right? Like, if you have a preeminent work in one of those two spaces, then that's kind of who you are. If it comes early in your career, right? And it can be hard to kind of get out of that definition. And when you're interested in genre stuff and you're interested in horror and you're interested in other things, you're worried about being pigeonholed. By then, I didn't feel like that would be so much of an issue because I had written so many other things, and I was like, okay, I can maybe approach this. And I don't know, I just had stuff I wanted to wrestle really out for myself. Like, growing up, like being poor, going to a scholarship school, like, having to, I guess they call it code switching, right? Like, having to make sure that I could be acceptable in this culture.
Yeah.
Still being sincere and honest in this culture that I'm from, right? Kind of never really feeling like I was on terra firma, in my entire adolescence. Like, either I was going to be this poor charity case fraud over here, or I was going to be someone that was turning his back on, kind of his family and his culture and the rest of it over here. And you're always balancing it out, right? And so my journey in high school was I was a kid going to this incredibly rich high school who always wore Public Enemy t-shirts. Like, I just couldn't, kind of figure it out. Like, how could I pay both tithes at the same time, right?
Right.
And so that's really where Richard came from, kind of out of all that stuff. But for me, really, American Carnage is more about narcissism and kind of cult psychology and those kinds of things. Like, Win Morgan is a man with no principles, He doesn't really believe anything except that he should get more. And I don't want to be divisive, but there are certain politicians now who I think are like that.
Yeah, I mean,
you can take a pick, right? But that's what I wanted to engage, right?
Well, also, any good fiction comes from reality, right? That's important.
Yeah. So it wasn't so much like, because I don't think the book answers the problem of race relations. I asked some questions, and all that, and I talked to some people in white supremacist movements, and I did my due diligence and that kind of stuff. But for me, it really is about ambition and a narcissism and solipsism. The idea that only thing that matters is you, and how that's used to move people, and how you can be perverted by your own fears, how you could be manipulated by what you're afraid of. Yeah. And so Win Morgan is much more. People were like, "Well, is this just you? You just throwing a stone at Donald Trump?" And I'm like, "No, it's not." Win Morgan has more to do with Lucifer than he does with Donald Trump, right? Yeah. Because I don't think it's wise to. Well, not wise. I shouldn't say that. That's very judgmental. But I'm not interested in making anything I write a direct analog of any living person, because that means at some point what you wrote is irrelevant.
Well, I think also to a degree it's just, to be quite frank, I think it would lack nuance. I think that one of the most interesting parts about developing a character is almost like I'd compare it to like Eddie Van Halen's Frankenstein guitar. Like you're taking all of these different parts and you're making something out of it that's, I mean, if a character is a terrible character in the sense that they're just bad, like a bad person,
right.
It doesn't deprive the fact that a good character is going to come out of sort of that piecemealing, right? And I think it would be, I've read plenty of stories where, writers can just get lazy and they make these very, very direct and upfront sort of materializations of these people in their work. And I think sometimes it works. I think it's a very sparing tool for a writer to use it in that way. But the fact that Win Morgan sort of represents so many things, right? You have your various sort of political affiliations you can make. You have religious context that you've kind of brought to it, or at least the nature of the character. And the interesting part is when you bring up like Satan, Lucifer, I get a little bit of more of that John Milton's Paradise Lost Satan kind of along in the sense that, he's very clever and he's sort of attacking his objective. I mean, not only underhandedly, but he very much reflects the serpent. Going to Adam.
Win is a corrupter, right? Yeah. And that's one of the things I'm always interested in is how are we corrupted? What do we do when we realize we're being corrupted? How do we get out of it? I mean, there's a lot of that in Batman and the Outsiders. There's some of that in Angel. The idea of corruption on a spiritual level or a psychological level, not necessarily on a systemic level. Right. Is something that really fascinates me, because I think there's a lot of undiscovered country there. And so, American Carnage for me is really a story about corruption and how corruption can breed more corruption if you're not careful. It's about a bunch of people that are shaving away their ethics because they believe they're righteous, going after a person who is villainous, but perhaps by the time they get to the person, they've become so terrible that, they sort of forgot the reason why they began it, or it's very hard to distinguish one from the other. And I think that's kind of like the path of vengeance and the rest of it, So those things are the things that matter to me. I mean, it's because you're not going to solve a societal issue with book, right? You're not going to answer the question. And just let's be honest, if a person is a racist, they're likely not going to read the book anyway. That's true. I don't think my work is very popular with the Klan. So, I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe they love Batman and the Outsiders. I don't know, right? But I would imagine if you look through the shelf, probably not going to find a lot of Bryan Hill, in Richard Spencer's library. So you're not really going to convert anyone. Not that I think you have to as a writer. Most people that are going to read that book are going to be people that, if not agree with you, are open to the perspective that you have. Yeah. So for me, it's like, okay, you're here. Let's explore the psychology around this stuff, the emotions around this stuff, and then you guys can make up your own mind about how you feel about these issues. That's not my job to tell you what to think, but I want to explore it from these kind of intimate, kind of granular characterization ways.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the strengths of American Carnage. You take this very multifaceted approach, right? I mean, I speak specifically, I said it earlier about how it doesn't necessarily condemn one side. It condemns the sort of underhanded nature that both sides can display, and how dangerous that is.
And it's not, if I have to condemn, a dark and twisted movement, then you're probably not a reader that's going to be engaged with the work, right? It's not.
Right.
It's like, I trust the intelligence of readers,
That's
and
important.
I think that most people are generally good. I mean, look, when self-preservation becomes a part of the equation, sometimes we can do terrible things, but most people generally decent, or at least are aware of decency, right? So I don't think I need to tell you this side bad, these people bad, right? It's like Silence of the Lambs. I don't need to tell you that Hannibal Lecter is a cannibal and that's a bad thing. You'll figure that out on your own, right? Like, I can help construct the interplay between him and Clarice, which could be really interesting and surprising, But I trust people to be able to come up with their own kind of ethical compass, and I mean, maybe, because I'm not condemning my bad guys in that book every issue, is it possible that somebody reads that and wants to be like Win Morgan? I mean, I suppose, but I doubt that is the outcome that the vast majority of readers would experience. So, I like to just kind of present the story the way I see it and let people kind of make up their own minds, about like how they feel, like come to it on your own terms about it rather than just, agree with me all the time.
Yeah, I mean that's important, and it definitely contributes to the nuance of American Carnage. I think you find all too easy, in any storytelling medium, comics included, that people tend to lean into the sort of aggressive nature of the world's politics, and they'll really, again, they'll condemn their opposition, and they'll bolster sort of the image of whatever they ally with. And the important thing about American Carnage is that there's really no, it goes to all of these different extremes. There's no side that I think the reader can clearly ally themselves with. Well, I mean, the protagonist, Richard, even feels like he starts to lose himself, and that's sort of a running theme. And again, I feel like that certainly is a connection with your past, kind of trying to live between two cultures.
I mean, I think you do. Look, if you write something, and let's say you write something and it touches some polarities, I think you're doing a good job when people on both sides are yelling at you, right? Like, and not that that's the goal, but that means that it doesn't come off as one-sided propaganda. And some people labeled it as such. I've seen the YouTubes, right? But generally, those aren't people who actually read the book. They might have seen a page of a burning cross and thought to themselves, well, people don't burn crosses anymore. This book is ridiculous. Okay, fair enough. People don't burn crosses that much, but, it's a book. What are you going to do? But people who swam through it, I think they explored it and again, kind of came to their own determination about how they felt about the material, right? Like, look, and I'm not throwing stones at writers who use their work to soapbox or use it for catharsis. I totally understand that instinct. Yeah. You see something going on in the world, whether you're a conservative or a liberal or somewhere in between, and you feel like the message that you think that people should hear isn't getting out for some reason, or it's not getting out loud enough, or maybe they're just not considering it from a perspective that you think is important. And you have a moment and you have a platform and you want to use the platform to shine the light where you think the light needs to go. That's an absolutely valid form of storytelling. It's just not one that I'm particularly good at. It's just not the way my mind works. I can't approach it that way.
I think you're all the better for it, though, to be honest. You've sort of conditioned or you've been conditioned into a way of thinking to sort of attack this problem on every end rather than sort of, again, signal boosting a very particular argument. And I can't help but think just over the years of talking to you that it is almost a little bit cathartic to generate the conversation, to get more people thinking about it in a way that's not aggressive, that's not combative, because we're talking about American Carnage, and there's so many different complex characters with so many different angles on the sort of prevailing situation in the story and the world at large, right? I mean, every single one of these characters is tackling how to handle not only sort of the human condition, but the conditions of the world specifically and the society that they live in, which is what makes it important to me, right? The fact that nobody is yelling at me to think a certain way or to feel a certain way, I think is really important, because we get enough of that, I think, out there on various medias. The fact that this book to me really generates a conversation and makes you reconsider the way we're approaching things, and makes you, honestly, I think, and this kind of stems from, I think, the first piece of advice you'd ever given me, in that you need to try to put yourself into somebody's position. And if you can't, don't attack them for it, because you don't know what's happening on the other end. You don't know what's going on.
Stuff like, look, there's a certain percentage of people that are just sociopaths or psychopaths, and they can't be reached, right? And I honestly think that at a lot of times when we're looking at, like, for instance, racism, I think sometimes we're looking at sociopathy, and racism is just the form it's taking in that moment. I've met very few people that are virulent racists, and that's their only problem, right? Like, it's rarely someone's Persian flaw, right?
Yeah.
Like, usually there's a whole host of issues they have, and then part of that leaves a space open for prejudice. But rarely have I seen someone possessed by prejudice, and I would say, well, if they would just tackle that issue, they'd be fine. No, usually there's a bunch of stuff just kind of broken inside of them, and how they manifest it is that, and it does real harm and all that stuff, and so that's all things to be considered, right? But I'm always interested in, kind of like, what's the beating heart underneath everything, right? Like, what is that? And Batman the Outsiders, you just saw someone mention it. It's the same thing there, I'm always interested in the relatable motivations of characters, and it's funny. I was just talking to Phil Jimenez on Twitter, and he was advocating for villains that were evil, like diabolically evil, that you did not identify with, and how he enjoys stories that are like that. And I could certainly see the benefit of those stories, but again, I'm not particularly good at that. I mean, like, maybe I could do like a slasher story, like a Michael Myers or something, but in any story where I was going to spend a lot of time with the villain, I need the villain to be not someone that you can relate to, full stop. But you can understand the journey they may have taken to get there, right? Like, I'm really fond of the Omen movies from the 70s, Omen 1, 2, and 3, right? And they're all about Damien Thorne, and he's the Antichrist. Well, the Antichrist is, by definition, evil. But what I found fascinating, especially about the second two, is they still give Damien something of a character arc. Like, the first movie, he's a kid. He's like 12 years old or something. And weird things keep happening around him. And he has a sense that he might be powerful, but doesn't really understand what's going on. And then he feels into his hairline and finds the 3 6s, right? And he's reading like the biblical passage at the same time. And he realizes, oh, wait a minute, maybe I am the jackal's son, right? Maybe this is who I am. And he runs to this pier and he screams, because he doesn't want to be the Antichrist. But then he reconciles with it and becomes like, villainous and all of that. But as a kid, I was like, oh man, I hadn't really thought about, like, wow, like, a character like Damien Thorne might not want to be Damien Thorne and has to kind of get there, right? So, like, even when I was like a kid, stuff would really fascinate me like that. I've always been, kind of Will Graham interested in why the Tooth Fairy does what he does, kind of getting into the whole deal. And I think I honestly have maybe like an innate kind of empathetic response. I think I do empathize a lot, not sympathize, but empathize. And I think that shows up in the way I write characters, because it's hard for me to separate someone else's emotions totally from my own, if that makes sense.
Well, the thing, and I bring these two specific characters of American Carnage up because I think they reflect sort of both sides of that argument. You have, Jennifer Morgan, who is this really complex character who sees the sort of downfall of her father and all of the kind of evils that he is committing actively and systemically. But there's a sense of conscience there. I mean, there's the moment when, she's in the car with her daughter and Richard, and she kicks him out and she starts crying, or the moment she advocates to win, likely already sort of knowing Richard's background, that, he's gentle with her daughter and he's all of these things, but he knows sort of when to turn the off switch. And then there's also like Sheila, right? Who is the other end. She is kind of pursuing the evils of her society, this sort of objectively evil thing, but kind of begins to run herself into a hole. And she kind of comes to the question as to whether or not she should compromise her values to accomplish the task. And that's where I think these characters represent this really interesting mirror, especially how they're sort of both they're both not like completely in like a romantic relationship with Richard, but there's certainly an intimacy that they both share with Richard. And
there's an intimacy triangle between them.
Yeah.
Right?
And they both are interesting to me because obviously Richard is composed of these two interlocking halves that are not contradictory, but they're kind of warring.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah. And they each want to be the most important woman in his life in their own way. Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's a lot of like life experience really that I put in there, like I've had a lot of just kind of formative experiences, I was raised by my mother. My father died when I was a kid, so I was raised by my mom.
Yeah.
I had really strong-willed teachers in grade school and high school, and who were women that invested into me, kind of as a student to kind of keep me from sliding off of a course they thought I could maintain, and so I've kind of been between forces like that in a way. And when you like removing like the romantic stuff and any sort of sexual overtones, right? Just putting all that to the side for a second, there is a unique way a powerful woman can influence a man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? It's different, and I've had strong paternal influences in my life, but those are different. Right. And I think there's almost like an understanding of psychology, that they have. That's just a little different than how we normally come out as dudes.
Yeah.
At least like heterosexual dudes,
Yeah.
And I wanted to capture, kind of some of that. Again, like not really bringing it to a finer point of making a statement, but just sort of capturing it. I mean, I remember I dated someone whose father was a bigot, but had allowances for me, because I was, a good one, as it were.
Yeah.
And and I'm dating this person. This is years and years ago, but I'm dating this person, and you realize at some point, a day will come when she's going to have to choose between me and him, and I'm going to lose. I'm not going to win that.
Yeah.
And then you got to ask yourself, like, do I stick around? Because we're fine. We go out, we have fun, we have conversations, like we do share like things that matter to us. She wasn't like, like Jennifer, she wasn't like an acolyte of her dad's philosophy, but you just know in the back of your mind and like in the center of your heart, at some point, it's going to be an issue and I'm going to lose.
Yeah. Without spoiling too much, it definitely reflects in the conclusion of American Carnage for sure. The choice that Richard has to make, you set it up in such a way where, it's almost believable that there might be I don't want to spoil it because it's so good, and I really encourage everybody watching to read it for themselves. You might think that this might turn out another way, and Richard ultimately has to make a decision that I think very much reflects on what you're saying. Sorry for interrupting, by the way.
No, for sure. Like, yeah, I mean, it's, Michael Mann is my favorite filmmaker. Everyone knows that, right? And what I love about Michael Mann is Mann's films use the trappings of archetype to deconstruct certain aspects, and there's like a kind of a confrontation momentum of his movies, right? There's this side, thieves, cops, bank robbers, FBI, right? Like, but you're going to get the kind of, collision that you would normally get in most movies, but he doesn't promise you the same kind of resolution. And that's something I really admire. Excuse me. That's something I really admire is it doesn't always end the way you think it would end or the way you would want it to, but it ends the way you knew it had to, right?
Yeah.
There's like this kind of fatalism to it, you know, like this is the only way this could have gone, you know? And in retrospect, you're like, yeah, you're right. This is the only way this could have gone. I wish it hadn't have gone this way. And I love a story where you realize the end was set in motion from like the first scene, where like it wasn't something that it didn't stumble into its ending. You realize like, oh yeah, with the way these people are, with what they want, with how they intersect with each other, this is the only way this could have gone.
Yeah. You know? Yeah, that you definitely get a sense of that in American Carnage. It's very tight, and you know
Thank you, Aaron. By the way, I saw your comment.
Particularly, you know, in American Carnage, I think it's very tight the way that you sort of see the ending. You see the end result very well, and you do it in this. I mean, apropos seeding. Like it literally feels like you're planting all of these things, and they're all kind of growing at different rates until they finally all blossom right on a certain day. And that's something that I really like about American Carnage is, and you don't see that a lot in comics because you never know when a series is going to end. And I think that's sort of one of the great things about you having this very tight story with a beginning, middle, and end. You're able to sort of make that forecast early on and have it really stick the landing. And you also sort of put the plane down in a way that you wouldn't entirely expect, right? Like it's not exactly what you think it's going to be, but it's warranted and it makes sense within the context of the narrative and of the world that you've set up, which is why I like it so much. I'm really trying hard not to spoil the story because I really want to read it.
I talked to Frank Miller once, many, many years ago. And I asked him for just like a little bit of like writing advice, just like, tell me something, man. And he said that he always knows how his story is going to end when he starts it, but it doesn't always end that way. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. So I try to have an idea of what the ending is going to be. It can change, you know, over the course of it. But you know, like with even, you know, Batman and the Outsiders or Angel or, you know, screenplays I write or whatever it is, I tend to know what the end is. So I can get there in an elegant way, hopefully foreshadow things like, you know, layer the experience as you need to as a writer. But I always leave room to pitch shift it. You know, if I think, you know what, that ending would feel really false now after all this has happened. So maybe I need to, you know, put more gravity in there. Or I can say, you know what, this is going to be a dark ending, but we haven't earned that. And that's not where this story wants to go. Maybe the story wants someone to actually win, right? So I try to stay pretty malleable. But in the beginning of a process, when I'm doing my outlining stage, my plotting stage, I definitely would be able to answer a question of, well, this is how it ends, you know? Yeah. But I'm not always going to stick to that.
It's interesting because by your description, you seem to be this interesting compromise between what Neil Gaiman and George R.R. Martin kind of refer to writers as. They say that you're either a builder or a gardener, which a builder, you know, self-explanatory. You kind of log everything up from the beginning, from the outline. Very little room to change. A gardener is very much you develop the story as it goes along. And they typically say that most writers kind of fall into one category or the other. What I think is really interesting is you seem to kind of fall in between. You iron out as much as you possibly can, but you're willing to change the design and the blueprint in order to accomplish what you feel like will better suit the story as you continue to write it.
Well, I think that, you know, that honestly might come from like music, really. You know, like, you know, I was in a band for a while and I still write music, you know, from time to time. And when you're playing out for people, you got to kind of go where the crowd wants to go.
Yeah.
You know, like I was in a Pearl Jam cover band for a little bit. I didn't play anything. I was just singing. But we might have an idea of what we wanted to do. But if they wanted to hear like Even Flow, then you did Even Flow. You know, like you might have been more into Daughter that night. They didn't want Daughter. They wanted Alive. So you're doing Alive. Or even like going out to karaoke, like, it's a simple thing, right? But I think karaoke is really helpful for me when I write, because for any writer, I would suggest like finding a hobby or something you can do where you have to respond to the feeling of the people around you in real time. I think that's helpful.
Yeah.
So I've had plenty of moments. There used to be this little bar in New York called Jappus. It was called Jappus 43 because it was on 43rd Street. And it was really a Japanese karaoke bar, but it had like public karaoke with like the mics that they would kind of hand out and everything. And the crowd was pretty like diverse in terms of, kind of vocation and culture and the rest of it. You get a lot of business folks, you get the regulars, you get like college kids, what have you. And one of the most fun things to do, because I was friendly with the bartenders, so they would like kind of get me my song placement. They would just kind of give it to me when I had to go. Would be like to watch the crowd and think about, what does this crowd need to hear right now, right? Like not like what I want to sing, as much as what's the vibe in this room, and you're kind of making a guess, like I bet if I did like Wanted Dead or Alive, this place would explode, And then you do, and it does, and you're like, yeah. Or like, like you can tell that this is kind of like a place where everyone's parked into like the little corners. They're not really socializing, talking to each other. Maybe I just need to give them like a little Sinatra, maybe like One for My Baby or something, just in the background, just to kind of give them a little mood music to kind of keep it going. I love that, right? And so I think that kind of reacting on the fly and figuring out what you can do. And, I kind of take that into my storytelling. I always say that preparation sets the stage for experimentation.
I like that.
You have to prepare to be able to experiment wisely, pragmatically, right? And so, it's like martial arts. I don't really, practice as much as I should at all anymore. But, when I was deep into it, you would if I knew I didn't really do much competition, did a little bit, but not too much. But I did a lot of sparring. I was big on sparring, right? So if I knew I was going to spar somebody who was pretty good, the night before I knew we were going to spar in class, I would meditate and I would take myself mentally through the fight, knowing what I knew of how they fought, knowing what I knew about how I fought. And I would just kind of keep playing the fight in my head. And if I make a mistake, he's going to capitalize and he's going to do that, so I can't do that. Then I go back to the beginning and not make that mistake and see what happens next. And I would kind of go through that, and it would take me like a couple hours. So by the time I had gotten to the fight, I'd already fought him in my head 50 times, right? Doesn't mean I would win. I would still lose sometimes. Sometimes I would win. But I felt so prepared for whatever may come that I never really got into a place where I didn't think I had a response to something. Sometimes it just wasn't good enough, but I never really felt lost, right? Like, because I had kind of prepared that way. And so I do that with like storytelling as well. I map it all out. I kind of outline it in fair detail. And then what I'll do is I'll meditate and I'll play the story in my head like a movie. Even if it's a comic book. If it's a comic book, I'll see the comic book in my head, right? So I'll write the issue or have the idea what the issue is. Then I'll sit cross-legged and meditate and have the book in my mind. And I'll turn the pages and look at the panels, imagining what they would be like if I was drawing it, or if, imagining what they'd be like if the artist drew it, because I'm familiar with their work, right?
Right.
And then I would know what the pacing felt like. I know if these panels would really work, right? So like, I have this kind of weird esoteric process, but that helps me, kind of get it on the fly. It's like when you're playing piano, learning the song is important, but you don't really learn the song until you've learned the song. Because once you learn the song, you can now play the song, right?
Yes.
And so you know it. Your fingers know where to go. I know My Funny Valentine. I know what the chord progression is. It's this and then B minor, and then I go here and I do that. And then once you stop thinking about what comes next, and you know what comes next, that's when the feel comes, right? That's when you get the swing in there. That's when you really start to understand it, So I feel the same way about writing.
Yeah, I definitely get that. When I was younger, I used to.
I'm talking about jazz. It must be this wine's kicking in.
On that, man, if you ever go to a New York Comic-Con and you ever want a good place to get a drink, I would love to show you this incredible Japanese blues bar.
Oh, what's
down, I think it's just called B Flat.
Okay. I think I heard of it.
It's a very, very good bar. Highly recommend.
Yeah,
but
maybe next time I go to New York, maybe we'll get like a little crew of like comic book heads together. We'll go down there and first round of drinks on me, drinks and appetizers on the kid.
Jeez, that'd be too kind. I mean, I'd definitely be down to sit and have a drink with you, man.
I used to love those little places in New York. Just as an aside, I know we're not talking comics, but yeah, I was in New York like a decade, man, and my favorite places to be would be either hotel bars. You'd have the most interesting conversations there, and you could be anybody you wanted in a hotel bar. Yep. No one cared, right?
Yep.
Everyone's moving through, and you'd have these like little Hemingway moments there. And then like the little, like not even hole in the wall. They're like nice places, but they're just these little small, like off the beaten path speakeasy kind of places.
Yep.
That you're not even sure how they stay in business because how would anyone know this is here, right? And you walk in at like 1 o'clock in the morning, and then you fall in love with whoever's at the microphone, and you're like, "This is amazing,"
I had this experience when I went for my interview at Marvel. Obviously, if I'm in New York City, I'm gonna hang out for a couple days, and I went to this rooftop speakeasy at the McKittrick called the Gallo Green, and it was. I mean, it's just a wonderful occasion. But basically, at the bottom, like when you're leaving Gallo Green, the rooftop. They're so smart about the way that they're doing this. They bring you down into this underground velvet bar at the bottom of the hotel, and it's so cool. Like it's and it's always live music. And I'll have to show you this video. There was just this woman dressed in like 60s to 70s regalia, just belting out a bunch of stuff. Not limited to like the Bee Gees and sure. And Freddie Mercury, and obviously, you get down to that point, and you're already gone, and it's very much that moment where I get down to that velvet bar. My intention is to leave and go get a New York slice before I go back to my Airbnb, and I'm just caught. I'm there for 2 hours.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's like some stranger that you'll probably never talk to, who's just like singing "How Deep Is Your Love" or something, and you're having the most intense experience just for you. You got a little drink in your hand, and I feel your yep. And you're like right in there, right? Like when I was your age, man, I lived to get my heart broken. Like, I was all about who is the worst for me. I was like The
Weeknd. Funny brief story. You know what's interesting? It was 2 New York Comic-Cons ago. I'm walking back from an Italian restaurant to go to the subway to then go back to my Airbnb, and I shit you not, we're somewhere in like not the garment district, like east of the garment district, I would say. And we're passing by a hotel, and I see this dude walking into like this black Escalade with these big hulking guys around him, and I'm like, he looks freaking familiar. Takes off his hat for a second, obviously his hair blows up. It's like, oh my God, it's the freaking Weeknd. So it's funny that we're talking about bars in New York and the Weeknd comes up.
I heard Abel's really nice, man. I never met dude. I don't want to say we have mutual friends because that's not accurate. Yeah. I know people that have worked with him and say he's a nice guy.
Yeah, I didn't want to be a jerk because we're in the middle of Manhattan and I didn't want to blow up a spot. I was like, hey man, you're like kind of this generation's Michael Jackson. And he's like, oh, thanks. And I was just like, I didn't.
Yeah, everything I've heard, he's, like he lives a little bit like his music, but he spends a lot of his time working, But that was like me, man. Like I was like, if you looked like you were going to hurt me, then that was it. Yeah, that was where I was going, right? And I got stories out of it. I got a novel out of that that almost got published. Honestly, yeah. Come to think of it, that's right. Yeah, like 19. Well, no, I started writing it in 2000 and finished it in 2001, and then 9/11 happened and sort of changed the whole business climate, and it never came out. But
yeah,
I think for a lot of writers, man, sometimes heartbreak is what gets you there. Like you hate going through it, but then you got something. Yeah, and now you can play the blues.
Yeah, I hear you, man.
You can play the blues, right? So
I hear you.
It was useful.
In the very brief time that I've been writing, I hear you, man. My daddy issues. Everything that I do.
I have those.
In everything that I do. So I 100% hear you, man. And as we're kind of like closing out on the American Carnage talk, I feel like I should have asked of this sooner. For those that haven't read it, what would you give them as an elevator pitch to American Carnage?
Oh, well, ultimately, American Carnage is a crime thriller about a disgraced FBI agent, former FBI agent, Richard Wright, who's biracial. He can pass for white. And he's brought in to a case when an FBI agent is seemingly murdered by a burgeoning white supremacist organization that's hiding in plain sight. And so the story is about Richard infiltrating his way into the organization, and nothing is really as it seems. And it sort of goes, this way, that way, upside down, and the other way, as he's trying to both solve the case and solve his own personal issues and kind of find some clarity in the world, But it's a crime story. So, ultimately, even if you're like, I don't want to deal with it, I turn on the TV to see the same thing. But don't worry about it. It's a crime story. Like it's in that milieu, right? But I think it still goes hard on like the Michael Mann crime of it all, which also mattered to me experientially, And I think we had about 9 issues we did. 9 issues of that. And the nice thing now is you can get it collected, which I think is the best way to read it, frankly.
Yes.
I kind of wrote it as a sit down, get a beer, get a couple beers, and kind of go through it sort of deal.
Although I'll give you a lot of credit. The way that you sort of block out the end of each issue makes you not like. I remember reading this as this was coming out, and waiting month to month was unbearable. So,
Andy Corey and we talked about it, and I said that I wanted each last page to kind of be like a tarot card.
Yeah.
Where it sort of captured an emotion, so that if you took out all the last pages and made them tarot cards and kind of laid them out, you would still get some kind of narrative out of that.
Yeah.
And I thought, Leo and Dean did a fantastic job. I mean, I'm still relatively, kind of middling in my comic book career. And when you start getting like great artists like that working with you, it's amazing. It spoiled me.
Yeah.
It's out there, man. And it's, unfortunately, it's more relevant now than it was, I think, when I first did it. And I that's a book you hope gets less relevant every day, right? You hope, the YouTubers might not believe me, but I genuinely want a lot of what they say to be true. I want it to be irrelevant. I want it to be something that doesn't really bear any truth for the society we live in. But unfortunately, it's still relevant, right? And it gets more relevant sometimes, depending on what's going on. Yeah. But ultimately, it's a crime story, man. It's a crime story about identity and betrayal and revenge, and how much of yourself do you have to give up on your way to justice.
Yeah, it's incredibly nuanced, and again, it is to me. I think it's an actual crime that this not only did not win an Eisner, but was not nominated for an Eisner, and I mean that truly. And my those who watch my content know that I'm not afraid of being very critical to writers that I am a fan of. I mean, I gave a not so hot review to Scott Snyder's Death Metal, of whom I have a tattoo of his work. I have art from his Batman on my wall.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, look. So, we don't always, get the bucket, right? Like, right. I certainly have issues with the way Fallen Angels came out, and a lot of that had to do with kind of me and like my level of focus. I thought I could have done a much better job kind of bringing it home there. There's some things about it I still really like, and it's spoken to people in some ways. I appreciate that, but I would do more with that. If I could go back, I'd go back on that one. Yeah.
The point being is this praise is, I think, well warranted. American Carnage is, Vertigo is my jam, and I think this is one of the best, not only Vertigo titles, but one of the best comic books to come out this decade. It's topical, it's nuanced, and if you're not reading into it for all of the sort of societal connections, you can just read it for a damn good story. And you did bring up Leandro Fernandez, who is excellent. And for me, the first issue, for some reason, his art didn't connect with me super well. But as I continue to read the book, and as I've become a little bit more, I've started educating myself on sort of the almost cinematic choices that a comic book artist has to make. And he lines up his shots and where he chooses to, for example, like spot blacks on the page in a very, very deliberate way. And one thing that I do kind of think is worth showing here is this particular conversation between Sheila and Richard Wright. Let's see.
Oh,
there we go. Yeah. So this, I think, is a phenomenal page for many ways. The way they're lining up the shots, the way as the conversation kind of gets to its peak, that he closes up on these almost seemingly insignificant close-up shots on Richard, but it speaks volumes about the sort of tone that you're trying to push. And I know you're a big fan of 100 Bullets, and I don't know if this was a conscious kind of choice that you wrote into the script or if it's a conscious choice on Leandro's part, but I get a 100 Bullets vibe in the way that Eduardo Risso has those panels where you have like,
sure.
Yeah.
Like, Azzarello was a big influence on, I mean, really, Azzarello was the reason I wanted to do the project in the first place. Not because he directly, kind of pushed me there, but I was always a big fan of his work, from 100 Bullets, Loveless, even, and when there was an opportunity to do a Vertigo book, I wanted to do something that would kind of live inside of that feeling, that space. It wasn't like something I told Leo to do. I wasn't like Eduardo Rizzo, like go like this. And Leo distinguishes himself, but I think what you see in the first issue is an artist and writer who are doing their job, but they don't know each other yet, right? And you're not going to know each other on issue 1, And I thought he did a great job, but I honestly think I did not know him well enough to write for him effectively, right? Like that was a script I had written, and then he came aboard, and then he executed it, and I thought he did a good job with it, but when you start working with someone, then you start writing towards them because you see the layouts, you see their corrections, you know what they do, right? So you start feeling more comfortable about doing things that you wouldn't normally do. So like looking at that page, I didn't know that Leo was going to do like essentially what is a dolly in, right? Yeah. That's basically what he's doing, right? He's starting in the 2 and he's coming in to like a close up, and then he gets into an ECU, right? Like that's, if I was directing it, that's how you describe that to your TP. Right. Well, now that, when I learned like, oh, he really likes doing those moves. Like he thinks like that. It would let me write in different ways. And funnily enough, it would let me write more open.
Yeah.
So the first issue, I have more detail about perspective, right? So like I was holding him back in issue 1 by telling him too much of what I wanted to see. And I realized that after having looked at his work, and I'm like, oh, okay, you know what? You got to let this guy do his job, Bryan. Like, you don't need to be all up in his desk like that. And I apologized to him. I was like, my bad. And then I started giving him scripts that were pretty much just screenplays. Like, they'd be, I would paginate them so I would know whether or not I had 20 pages of material, right? Like, I would never just give someone just a screenplay and say go, because I don't think that's fair to them. So I would at least break it up into pages, so I could have a splash here and then there are 9-panel grid, what have you. I never say an artist needs to do my layouts because I'm not an artist, so I don't know how to do it. But I want to make sure it's possible to execute. So there's no like at the table, whatever. But then I wrote them really open to the point where they were mostly just dialogue, honestly. So any sort of visual motif, any sort of like, compositional theme you see, any of that, that's all him. I didn't tell him to do any of that. I just kind of wrote, this is where they are. This is what they say. I put it in the different panels, but the rest of it is him. He really directed that book,
and he did an excellent job at that. And where I was kind of comparing 100 Bullets specifically in the visual motifs, those panels where Rizzo would draw a blacked out panel with just eyes and a mouth to kind of declare the character's sinister intentions.
Yeah.
I get that in a way, but Leandro does something very interesting because when he does these blackout moments, they're not as sinister. It's more a situation of like emotional and intellectual honesty. It like when there's the scene where Richard gets attacked, and people are going to be really confused by this. When Richard gets attacked by Obama, and he calls Jennifer, and she kisses her daughter goodnight, and there's this blackout moment, and it's not just a product of lighting in the scene. It really conveys this emotionally honest kind of tone and atmosphere. And this page in particular, what I love, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, because my cinematic vocabulary isn't super strong. You talk about this doubling in, and it's this kind of reverse shot. And then as he closes up, it kind of abruptly goes into this anti-shot, and it's all Richard, and you continue to go into that ECU. And I love specifically this pause here, because it almost accentuates this word balloon, because not only does the pause kind of provide that brevity, but it's shorter than the rest of the conversations here being displayed. And it really kind of pushes the severity of what he's saying here.
Well, that kind of stuff, I do that kind of stuff in a script, right? And I act out all of my scripts before I turn them in. That's
awesome.
So I read it from one side, and I read it from the other side, and I make sure it's there. And sometimes you find little nuance, right? So, in a moment like that, you got the prop and the coffee, and you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this, and you're like, you know what? I need to say this line, drink, take a beat, do that. And when it makes sense, it kind of rhythmically, then I go back and I kind of re-edit it, because I do think about the pace of it. So, and that's why I do panels, right? Because the paneling helps me do the pacing. It's a weird relationship between writer and artist on a comic book, because it's almost like the writer is the writer and the editor, but the artist is the director with the colorist and inker, they're like the DP,
Yeah, in the cinematography.
So it's almost like you're pre-editing your film as a writer, and then the film gets shot for the edit. That's why the direct analogy of comics to film kind of breaks down a little bit, but that's kind of what it is. So those two panels up at the top, I just thought we needed some quiet right there. We don't even need to get the onomatopoeia, right? You can hear the soft pad of the door closing from the way that works, and when you have a character like Jennifer who can be so savage, and so brutal, just emotionally, psychologically, she knows that she's this gorgeous, intelligent, rich, kind of blade of a person, right? Well, you want to counterbalance that. And when you're dealing with a character that's tending to her child before that child sleeps, that's intimacy, So sometimes at the top of a script, I might say can we make this feel intimate? But it's a lot like working with an actor, because your penciler is also all of your actors. It's a very weird analogy, right? But when you're directing an actor, you don't want to give an actor a result. You want to give an actor a path, right? Never give an actor a result. Never give them the line reading, because then they're locked into it. But you can tell them what you want to achieve, where you want the scene to go, where you'd like your character to go, right? Their character to go by the time you're collaborating. And then they can figure out their own natural path to get there. So I'll do that in scripts where I say, I'd like this to feel intimate. Now, how Leo interprets that word, absolutely up to him. It's the same thing if you're dealing with two actors and they have an argument, but there's not enough energy in it. You don't want to say be angrier, because now they're just going to pantomime anger and it's going to feel incredibly false. Mm-hmm. What you want to do is you want to say, provoke him or provoke her, right? And let them figure out what that means, or tell them, you know what? You don't have to move through this fast. Don't feel the need to hit the line until you feel the line is coming out. And that gives them some space. And maybe they settle into a little more. Maybe they start listening to each other a little more, right? So so whenever I'm working with someone, I never like to dictate the result I want. Because even if I get the result I want, they might have had a better one that I just got off of the table because I just wanted the thing in my head to show up in the book. So instead, I tell them, well, I'd like it to feel like this. You know, I'd like to capture this feeling, or can we get some sexual tension here? Can we get a little dread in this moment here? You know, like things like that. But I love letting the artist interpret that however they want to interpret it. That's why I work best when I work with people that have like a rich emotional vocabulary.
Yeah.
You know, because they're interested and engaged by that kind of thing. I don't work very well with people who may be like technically fantastic, but they're just so, you know, they're so on point by point execution that I feel like I have to kind of over direct as a writer, which some writers like because they love having that much authority over their work. You know, once I see the book in my head, I've already seen it. So let's not worry about that book anymore. Let's see what the book that happens when we all work together.
Mm. It speaks volumes about the collaborative process, and to be able to kind of have that connection with you know, to let go of your work and to let go of the imaging in your head enough to let somebody kind of take it and carry it and reinterpret it, and it really comes through in American Carnage. Something that I often got frustrated about when I would look at other comic book reviewers is when they don't talk about the sort of the nature of how the artist is not only a director but a character actor. You know, they're the ones physically displaying those emotions and using gestures to evoke tone and emotion. And that's something that Leandro captures very well. You know, he's very good at both the cinematography and spotting blacks to denote this, and shooting, you know, the panel from a particular angle to denote this. But the way that he allows these characters to emote physically is insane. And what I love about about his work in this book is that he's so aware of comics and the sequential nature of comics, and how, you know, the thing that really separates to me comics from movies visually is that in comics you can hang on every frame. In cinema, you have scenes that you can hang on. You can hang on a scene in comic books, but in comics, you know, there's an efficiency and an economy to making sure that every panel does something for, you know, various things, plot, narrative, what have you. But Leandro does a very good job at knowing how these characters are going to emote in sequence.
Well, and, you know, he by the time, you know, we're in like issue 3, for instance, he knows them in ways that I don't.
Yeah.
Right. Because sometimes I'll have actors in mind while I'm working, like initially, just to kind of give it some kind of tonal frame of reference for myself. Right. But when the images start coming in, now I'm seeing his drawings in my head. Right. And so now we're both kind of in our mind's eye seeing the same people. And that's when a synergy really starts, because you're both seeing the same people. Now, I see it differently than he does because he's a professional illustrator. So he sees planes and line weights and stuff that I can't see. I see faces, you know, but I can't see it the way he sees it. Just like I'm sure if you're listening to, you know, like if you're listening to music with a sound engineer, they're going to hear things that a layman's not going to hear. You know, this person's just listening to the song. This person is hearing like the variances of frequencies and the rest of it, right? So the same thing. But we are to a point seeing the same people, and then those characters become our characters, right? They exist for like both of us, you know, and that's really freeing. And I could see him making choices based on his understanding of the world and characters, which I was fine with, and it made my job much easier. Because then I'm like, okay, I don't even know how this is going to turn out visually, but I know it's going to be right. However it turns out is the right way for it to turn out, you know. And I've been really lucky. I've had that relationship with virtually everyone I've worked with, from Leandro on American Carnage to Juan and Killmonger, you know, Dexter on Batman the Outsiders. Gleb came in for one issue of that, and then Gleb and I did 12 issues of Angel together. I've really had a great synergy with every artist I've worked with, you know, on these sort of longer form projects. since American Carnage, and yeah, it's been great. Like I don't do comics for the money. Like I make my money with TV and screenwriting.
Yeah,
I write comics because I enjoy writing them, and I enjoy the collaboration of it, and I love visual kind of narratives, and it helps unlock things in my imagination. But the collaboration is the part that I'm most interested in.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that makes the medium so special, I think. It's very much in the same way that it takes a village to raise a child, it really takes a village to make a comic, and all of those sort of interworking mechanisms playing to this one incredible story, both in a literal or literary sense and in a visual sense, is pretty astounding. And as we kind of close out the American Carnage portion of the conversation, I have to ask, if American Carnage were to get adapted, who are you casting as Sheila Curry, and why is it Regina King?
Regina would be great. I had actually know executives in our company really well, and honestly, if it was Regina, I'd want to frame it more around Sheila. Honestly, I would probably change the weighting of the narrative, because I wouldn't want her to be, because Sheila in the book is more of a supporting. I'd probably want her to be the lead.
Okay.
Which actually might be an interesting way to go, right? Like thinking about how a television series work, maybe it works better, with
or maybe a co-lead.
Yeah, like a co-lead kind of thing or something like that could be really cool. Yeah, no, Regina's fantastic. She has a production company out here, and I've met with them for a couple of reasons, kind of getting to know them, that kind of thing, and they're really nice. They're really good folks. She'd be great. Haven't really thought about it very much. I mean, I've gotten some people interested in it, but frankly, I have been hesitant to leap in. Because I didn't think that they didn't want to do the story as much as they wanted to kind of like do a thing and use the story to do their thing, Wasn't that interested in that. Not that I'm standing in the way of it, because, Leo, he certainly deserves to have more people take a look at the work and all that. So I'm not getting in the way of anything, but I'm waiting for like the right fit,
Yeah. Well, I mean,
so Michael, man, if you're out there watching me, give me a call.
I mean, as a fan, man, I appreciate the integrity, and knowing how you best want your work to be adapted and displayed to a new audience. And man, if I ever have any professional career out there being a writer, man, if this isn't adapted by the time I get to a position, I'd love to be a part of it.
Right on. I'll sure keep you posted. Like, because I've been working in TV for about 4 years running now, I would probably I certainly now would have more juice to be more involved in it than I would have been even when it came out, right? So that's another reason why I'm not like chomping at the bit, is the more credits I stack up, the easier it is for me to be deeply involved and to be able to hire people to work on it.
Very true. Very true. Well, if people watching haven't gotten it already, make sure you guys go check out American Carnage, and obviously you can tweet at Bryan with your thoughts. There's his Twitter tag right there on the screen. So make sure you guys go check out American Carnage. I do definitely want to talk a little bit about Batman and the Outsiders. It spawns out of your Detective Comics arc, which I reviewed way early on in the channel. I reviewed also the first issue of Batman and the Outsiders. But we do have a wonderful comment from Antuhar just saying, hey, thank y'all for your work on Batman and the Outsiders. Duke, Katana, Black Lightning, and Cassie are in great hands. Thank you for doing those characters justice, Mr. Hill.
Oh, well, righteous. Appreciate that. It's hard work, man. There's a lot of people to manage, in that story. And I can't really give each of them as much time as I want to all the time. I was just talking to someone on Twitter who's a reader that was very disappointed in the amount of game time Duke has gotten over the course of it. And, it's almost like television, where every season a couple of people get deep dives, and then the focus kind of shifts a little bit, so you can kind of service everybody. So it's tricky working on group books, but I'm glad that people they're getting something out of what I'm doing. That makes me feel good. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually just got a quick tip in the chat. Let's see if I can pop this up. We got a little comment from an anonymous tipper that just says, "Keep up the great work. Loving watching your channel grow." Thank you so much, man. I wish I knew who you were so I could properly thank you, but I appreciate that a lot. I definitely do. Thank you for your contribution, man. Yeah, so I just wanted to acknowledge whoever was generous enough to do that. But so Batman and the Outsiders, to me, and I've said this a lot. I don't know if you noticed that it was me when you were on Word Balloon the other night. I popped in and I was like, we're not going to talk about how Batman and the Outsiders has been like the most consistent Bat book DC's been publishing for the last year. And the thing that I love about Batman and the Outsiders is that it doesn't really cater to the stereotype of superhero comics. It delves a little bit deeper. And I know that, some folks' complaint is the decompression of it all. It's it definitely moves at a little bit of a slower pace, but where I think it works really well in that story is that you are developing each of your characters and all of your cast as individuals, but you're also taking the time to play them off of one another on a very specific and individualistic basis, right? Like you're playing Duke off of Batman, you're playing Cassandra off of Batman, Black Lightning off of Batman, Black Lightning off of Katana, off of the two kids, and it goes on. And that's what I think makes that story so special, aside from the fact that there's a lot of insight into who these characters are in a way that I don't think we've seen in a long time. And particularly the use of Duke and Cassandra I love, because they're two incredible members of the Bat family, one a little bit more recent than the other. Mm-hmm. But both of them sort of deserve the chance to be given a spotlight and a platform to show why they're such important characters. Cassandra in particular, I like that, and this has just kind of always been a pet peeve of mine. I like that you're involving her more, and you're involving Bruce a little bit more in her life, because I've always hated the idea of Bruce as an absentee dad. I don't like that. I've always felt that having Alfred as his guidance, that he would always try to be the best father figure he could. He might fail specifically because of his own past and his own sort of shortcomings. But to me, Bruce would always be the type of father that would put everything into that relationship, because he knows how much Alfred put into his. And I see parts of that where, your Batman is very self-aware of his flaws. He knows what's wrong with him. And he specifically, I think it was like in issue 12 or 13, where he has this conversation with Jefferson, and he's like, Bruce Wayne is just a boy. Batman is putting on the mask and protecting that boy from the violence and the tragedy that befell him. And I love that. I absolutely love that, and the way you're sort of playing that dynamic off of the rest of the cast and vice versa.
Well, I mean, in terms of like Bat consistency, I'll just be honest. I get lost in all the continuity stuff. And I'm writing a book, right? Like I just get lost sometimes. So what I try to do is just try to, write the character as I understand the character. Just try to honor like the Batman that I kind of know and love. I guess everyone's Batman's different. Everyone, has a different understanding of who he is. And, that Batman is, that's from a kid who grew up, in the 80s and, fell in love with the 89 movie and Denny O'Neil stuff and, read some books before then. And, like Batman, the Cult, Arkham Asylum, like that's like the kind of dude, right? That's the dude. That might not be everyone's Batman, but it's the Batman that makes sense to me. And the pace of the book, it's weird. Like to be honest, I don't have a lot of time to read a lot of comics. Like I read the ones I love over and over again to study and learn things from, but I don't keep up with like the kind of like every monthly. I just can't. Like right now I'm reading the Blade Runner 2049, or I think it's Blade Runner 2019 is the title of it, but it's in like the Blade Runner 2049 universe, right? So I love that book. But I think the pacing is probably due to the kind of comics I read. And, I guess I'm working on a monthly superhero book. I should probably read more monthly superhero books, but instead I'm kind of reading like the graphic novel stuff and I'm reading other stuff, right? So those are my pace influences more than I think normal monthlies would be. Yeah. And I could write a book where, like every two issues, they fight a bad guy. Everyone says a cool quip and we move on to the next thing. Not that I have anything wrong with that. That's a great experience. I want that experience a lot of the time. But I felt here, because I have characters that I wanted to put more meat on the bone in some of these people, like Bruce is Bruce. We all know Bruce and Adams, right? Like he's Hamlet. Everyone knows Hamlet. But like, with Jefferson, Katana, there's room to explore there. Cassandra has gotten some exploration from James. It's been really good. James Tynion in the fourth, really good stuff. But there were some aspects of her that I wanted to, kind of play with a little bit. Shiva and Duke, and so it takes time to kind of write them in a unique way. At least for me, it does. And so I could have it happen at more of a breakneck pace, but then it would be a really shallow experience for, I think, readers, right? So what I'd rather do is do something where scenes can have a little bit more meaning, characters can be explored a little more, and we get the histrionics when we get them, but hopefully when they show up, they have more effect, because this is a world where I might spend an issue on the consequence of something rather than just have a big event happen and then move on to the next big event and the next big event, and then the dimensional portal opens up and the other guy comes out and there's four of the same guy and they're going to fight the other guy and we don't know. Now he has the consciousness of all of them. He's going to, like, that's cool stuff, but sometimes they can move at such a pace that you don't get the emotional consequence of any of the stuff happening, Yeah. And I always want a Batman story I write to be a story where a punch across the face might still be a thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's the important thing in any story, but especially in a book where it surrounds around an ensemble, right? Like Batman and the Outsiders is an ensemble book. And where I give you a lot of credit is where I don't think I can give a lot of comic book writers a lot of credit right now, is that you're spending enough time with these characters to develop them and to get across, who they are, what their motives are, how they're changing. But I personally don't think it compromises anything. Like, I feel like we've gotten all of the kind of high action intensity beats, whether it's, the Outsiders fighting on the beach, with kind of Raish's gang of people, or it was, one of those earlier fights with the Outsiders and them prior in the city and whatever ends up coming next. But I prefer taking, even in comics where, we have to wait a little bit longer for each installation, but I prefer taking the time to sink my teeth into how the narrative is affecting the characters. Because I think that at the end of the day, as much as people come to comics for the bombast, the characters and the iconicity of these characters and ultimately the relatability of these characters, now that comics and superhero comics have begun to evolve, are what bring us back, right? And I think there's a big reason why I've noticed this supreme cult following for Batman and the Outsiders. I myself am proud to be a part of, because you're taking the time to let these characters grow, and you're doing it organically, and we're with them along the way. And that's why I connect with Batman and the Outsiders so much, aside from the fact that Dexter Soy is just an absolute phenomenon. Like he's
a beast. Like his stuff is really incredible. Well, look, I very much appreciate everyone who reads the book, right? Like that matters a lot to me. And I try to deliver them, like kind of a richer experience, not like richer in comparison to other people, but just like richer in comparison to like another thing that I could do. Right. Yeah. And I like action and I like investing into it, but there've been a lot of Outsiders iterations over the years. And I wanted to do something that was a little more kind of aware of the fact that they've run this before, and we're going to do something a little different with this one. It's going to be like a little thoughtful, a little meditative. It's going to be a book of ideas. Sometimes more questions than answers. Important questions get answered, but some questions remain, and that's been kind of interesting and rewarding for me. I mean, whenever I'm working on something that I don't own, like a corporate IP, like a Batman or, what have you, Punisher or whatever. I've written the Punisher like once, but like, my goal is to always leave the next person with more than I had going in. Right. Like, I want to leave more opportunities for, the fellow or the lady who's going to come up after me, and say like, hey, yeah, I built on what was there. I'm expanding it a little bit. Now you have more things you can play with, and then they can come in there and they can do their thing, with the character. So but in order to do that, I need to be able to kind of establish their emotional realities. I have to be able to kind of put them in an emotional place tell the reader, like, this is kind of where they are. This is what matters to them. These are the forces that are kind of pushing and pulling them, like that whole deal. And it takes time to do that effectively, right? Like, and so I understand, like Tony Isabella, I understand him being upset with the choices I'm making. Because he created the character and all that. And I understand someone saying, hey, you're not doing a lot with Duke here. I get all of that. It just takes time.
I think
to do things,
I think those criticisms, though, and I say this honestly, and I'd like to believe without bias, is that I think those are kind of unrealistic critiques, right? I mean, I don't think most readers really understand how complex it is to tell an ensemble story and to flesh out every character. And I think that, for what it's worth, you've done that very well. And when you talk about this sort of the way that you want to portray not only like an emotional honesty through these characters, but you want to access their motivations, right, through a various number of lenses. And I think that at its core, that's what drives intrigue of these characters, right? Ultimately, you have these great scenes, which I have here, that it's just like comics. Like, it is just like visually what comics can do best. And this is astounding. But at behind it all, there's something that drives these characters to do what they do. And I think that's what makes them interesting. That's what allows people to connect with them. And you see a lot of that in Batman and the Outsiders. Like I said, you get these big bombastic moments where Black Lightning is just zapping the shit out of people, and it looks phenomenal. But you also get those moments, like in one of the earlier issues, where Cassandra just kind of comes to Duke's aid when Bruce camouflages himself as Karma, and she's just emotionally there for him. And it speaks volumes about their relationship. It speaks volume about how Cassandra is growing as a character, how Duke is learning to open himself up. And that's what I love about Batman and the Outsiders, is for as much as it is this cool action-packed kind of espionage-ish superhero comic, there's the emotional honesty, and it makes this world, or this corner or pocket of the world that you are playing in, more intriguing to me, because we're getting the explosives along with, how people are feeling just as the exploding is beginning to happen, before it happens, after it happens, So, big kudos, Bryan. Seriously, Batman and the Outsiders to me is a very special book.
I appreciate that. I mean, look, the way I look at it, when you're doing when you're doing Batman and the Outsiders, it's a lot like a big band playing a smaller venue. And by that, I mean, Batman is the main Bat book, right? That's the stadium book. That is the big ticket master. That's the tour, right? Batman and the Outsiders is like when you see your favorite band and they're playing a smaller venue. Maybe you need to be like following them on Spotify or something to find out when it's going down, and then you go there and you get the album songs, but you might get them in almost like a little deeper dive on them, right? Because they don't have to do the stadium stuff. They can kind of get in there and do the other thing, right? So that's somewhere how I look at the book. Like, you have so many mainline Batman experiences to choose from at any given time. There's tons of them, right? You can never walk into a comic book store and there's no new Batman for you to read. There's always some. You got Detective, you got Batman, you got miniseries going on, the rest of it. So what I wanted to do here was, kind of use that opportunity because we're not the main Bat title, to do things a little differently. Because we're not, we're not kind of in that center stage of the circus, so we can kind of, play around with things a little bit and pace it a little differently, and, challenge things in different ways. And that's been really interesting to do, right? Which is why, I'm not particularly interested in ever writing the main Bat book, right? Because although it could be fun, I sort of like being a little off the beaten path, and maybe that's just like the independent filmmaker in me, the NYU of it all still kind of coming to the surface. But I kind of dig being not necessarily a B-side, but just sort of like, oh yeah, these are the tracks. Like when you buy the single, and then you got these other tracks. I didn't even know. Oh, this is cool. I haven't heard this version of "Smells Like Teen Spirit," you know. And when like when I was a kid, I would be really into Nine Inch Nails. Still into Nine Inch Nails, but I was really into Nine Inch Nails when I was like in my teens and 20s and all that.
Yeah.
And my favorite stuff would be like the remix albums they would do. You know, like I would get Downward Spiral and I would listen to it. I'm like, this is really dope, and I would love it. And then I would, pick up, some remix album that they put out, and I would fall in love with a version of Closer or something that was on there. And it might be like, like Seven, right? Like you look at the opening credits of Seven, and there's a different version of Closer that's playing, kind of in those opening credits, right? Let me just turn my light on because it got dark. But I would fall in love with that, and that would become my favorite version of the song, or like, a Perfect Circle, like getting a remix of one of their tracks. So I kind of look at Batman and Outsiders kind of like that. Like it's the track, it's Gotham, there's villains, there's Batman, there's Black Lightning. Yeah, the track is there. But it might be like a 7-8 minute version of that song with a long drum solo, right?
Yeah.
It might have a different kind of percussion thing there. It might go acoustic on this thing. You never heard this stuff. So I enjoy the ability to be able to do that. And I'm just really happy that, that people are having a good experience with it. Sorry to keep looking at my phone, but I have a food delivery coming, so I have to kind of keep it. I got to keep myself aware of it.
It's all good. It's all good. Batman and the Outsiders is, I think, a very special book, especially in the sort of superhero landscape of comics. Because to me, again, you really fulfill the bombast of superheroism, but man, deep down to its core, this is a story about people, and it's a story about people kind of trying to find their way around the world, or around their lives, right, and around the world they live in, and that's what I think. Again, it connects with so many people. And for anybody who's complaining about the way you're, evolving Duke, I mean, between your Detective Comics and especially the earlier bits of this run, I mean, Duke is getting some serious character development here. And I honestly think that you're doing more with Duke pretty much than anybody else has since he's been created. So
I get it. We all have our favorite characters and we want them to get playtime. And it wasn't like I was getting like a lot of negative feedback. It was really like, we like what you're doing with these other characters. We feel like you could do a little more with Duke, right? And to me, while that's criticism, that also tells me that you're invested into the story. And and look, business reality dictates how long a book's going to go. So that's not really up to me. It's up to how many people are buying the book and corporate things. But as long as I'm on the book, I'm going to continue to roll out my plans. And part of those plans are to get to kind of every character and really showcase them. And I think I've got, with Duke in particular, I think I've got him in a really interesting place because he's going to overcome what he's gone through with Karma. Ra's al Ghul has changed his powers. We don't know if that's permanent or not. He might not know whether he wants it to be permanent. His relationship with Cassandra is really strong. His relationship with Jefferson is starting to kind of thaw a little bit. And now Lady Shiva's in the picture, right?
Yeah.
So like seeing him play against all of that stuff, that can be really interesting. Like, the thing about comics is it's never really a question of whether or not they're going to stop the bad guy, because they always stop the bad guy. But to me, it's more about like what happens to them along the way. How are they changed by it? And you want really cool bad guys, right? You want dread, you want consequence, all those things, right? I'm not saying that they should get together and play Uno. But not that there's anything wrong with slice of life comics. Don't come at me. I'm fine with them. Let characters go to a coffee shop. I'm not, I'm just saying. But yeah, like seeing like, how they kind of shift and evolve and it, I learned things about myself from doing it, I start feeling different ways about things. When I first started bringing Shiva into the story, I realized like, what? I don't want her to be evil dragon lady. I'm not interested in that anymore. I'm interested in what are her genuine feelings for her daughter. That's interesting to me. I'm gonna write that, and so she's still gonna be Shiva and do Shiva stuff, but
and she's still gonna be hot. Don't worry.
Yeah, and that's part of it too. Like, I'm just gonna go a little more light here. That's part of it as well. Like wanting to make sure that she's got all of those qualities that we expect a Lady Shiva to have, right? So yeah, I don't know. Like it's a lot of times when you're reading my work, you're reading me working out my stuff and trying to make it entertaining while I work out my stuff,
Yeah.
But I just really appreciate everyone who picks up the book, because they're really getting a lot of me in that book. I live in a lot of those pages, and so it's nice to know that people are getting something out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, like I said, there's a reason that the following for it is they're very intense. I mean, again, I'm a part of it, and I see a lot of it, and rightfully so. As big as these characters are, it's important that there's this emotional honesty to them, and that's our gateway in as a reader, right? Like, we can't connect with Lady Shiva and Katana having this epic sword fight, somewhere in Gotham City, but we can connect with sort of Lady Shiva recognizing her downfalls as a mother, but being so sort of convicted in her sort of ideal as to how Cassandra should be raised, that she still wants to kind of take her away from Batman's side and project a different upbringing. And that's really interesting to me. That's what allows me to access that character in the same way that, on an even higher scale, Batman, right? Like, we love the mythology, we love the symbolism, everything that he represents in this sort of epic, grandiose way. But then when you break him down into, and he's, again, self-aware about this, about how he's just this 8-year-old boy looking to pursue an ideal that can never truly be, that can never truly come to an end. And Batman sort of being the vehicle by which that 8-year-old boy can explore that and can operate on that almost fruitlessly, right? Like, there'll never be, we won't have that Kingdom Come moment where he has the bat drones kind of flying everywhere and making Gotham the safest place on earth. But he does it anyways, right? And it's those things that I think, whether or not people can articulate that all the time as a reader, I think that that's what brings them in. We're like, it's like a Ferrari in a way. You come because it looks pretty, you stay because it runs immaculately, and that's kind of what I get out of this. And we have a chat from Comic Boom. He says the exploration of Shiva's maternal instincts and motivations regarding her daughter Cassandra is compelling, and I totally agree.
Well, I mean, like, I just try to keep in mind the kind of stuff I dug when I was growing up. When I was reading comics a lot, and like the kind of experiences I wanted and the explorations I wanted, and I always loved Cassandra as a character. She is still my favorite Batgirl, post-Batgirl, whatever you want to say. I'll just be frank. I understand how Cassandra Cain can be Batgirl. I never really understood how Barbara Gordon could. Like, I like the idea of Barbara Gordon, but she's just not as well trained as Cassandra is.
Yeah.
She's just point blank not as capable, right? And I mean, she's look, she has her strong suits, like her empathy, compassion, her ability to be a detective, like whether as Oracle or not Oracle, what have you. But Cassandra can go toe to toe with Batman.
Yeah,
in a unique way.
Yeah,
and if I start thinking about the Bruce Wayne that turned himself into something that would frighten the people that were frightening other people at night, then Cassandra Cain makes sense at his side. And I've always felt like that, right? But other people have different interpretations of it and other things they want from the character. I totally get that. But I wanted to deal with those aspects of Cassandra, and the fury that she kind of came out of. And I think Tynion did some great work, kind of giving her more dimension, the ballet of it and her relationship with Barbara and all of that. But so I feel like he'd done that stuff. So like, let me bring Shiva back into this picture, and let's see what their relationship is now, and I didn't want it to be just like a stock rivalry again. Like, who cares? What I wanted it to be was something interesting and layered and complex. And where each of them could kind of get out of the cliche of what they are, and instead be like a multi-dimensional version, kind of of that. Which is really what not that any of the characters are cliches, but like I never want them to just play the archetype, right? Yeah. And so with Jefferson, like, there's an archetypal way I could write Jefferson, but that would be terribly uninteresting. Yeah. And I wanted to get out of that, I wanted to let him. Honestly, I wanted Jefferson Pierce to be able to be Jefferson Pierce and not a symbol for every black superhero in comics.
Which I think works to your benefit, 100%.
Like he's a person. He's a guy. He has his own thoughts, his own feelings, He doesn't have to be a paradigm, all the time. He can be a real person with flaws and desires and anger, and all of these things, right? Like you want to be able to, you want every character to be able to embrace all the colors of the rainbow.
Yes.
You don't want to ever have to write a character and say, we can't do that because he represents. Like that to me is worse than not having, any characters that were diverse. If every time there's a character who is, who represents like a minority group or any sort of like kind of underrepresented thing, they can't be free to be characters.
Yeah.
And I wanted to set Jefferson free a little bit from the responsibility of being, that DC hero. And instead, like he's this person that has complexity, like we all have, So yeah, I mean, it's been a really fun experience to do it. I've learned a lot about myself over the process of doing it. I've met a lot of people digitally on Twitter from writing it that have been really great to meet, and I have some really, really interesting conversations. It's been all around rewarding. If anyone has questions, this is a good time to get to them because I have about 10 minutes, and then I have to. Okay. All right. So been going for a couple hours, guys. I haven't eaten yet, so food's coming, and Illuminati's getting a little hungry, but I got time to answer questions.
Awesome. Yeah. Everybody definitely make sure to send your live chats in right now so we can start answering a couple questions for you. And as you guys send them in, I do just want to say, adding that complexity to Jefferson, I think is what makes him so appealing. And I think that, when people try to lock down symbolism, I think that's when it loses sort of what makes it special and what makes it so endearing, because I think ultimately a symbol is supposed to kind of have some sort of broad interpretation to it that is a commonality, but ultimately there are so many different ways that symbol can represent a different subset of things to many different people.
Well, and I think that's to be clear. Like I think that it's important for people to be able to see themselves reflected in fiction. I think that makes society better, right? Yeah, you can't have a great society if everyone doesn't believe they get to be great. And a lot of the way that we frame greatness and possibility is through how we lionize characters in fiction, right? So you want to have examples kind of like from every subculture, every kind of class strata, however you want to like delineate it, right? Because it helps make society better. It teaches us all that we can have something positive that we can contribute. We can be something positive, I know what it's like to be, it's Halloween and you want to be a Jedi, but you don't really feel like Luke Skywalker because you don't quite look like him, and it seems like a small thing, but it can be a bigger thing. But along with that, if we want to get real equity in terms of voices being brought in and the ability of those voices to express themselves, we want to be able to give everyone the right to do what they want to do, like artistically, creatively, right? You want to be free to do things, free to have a character not be perfect, free to have characters make mistakes, free to have characters want things they shouldn't have.
Yeah.
That's life, like that's how life works. You can be a character who's dedicated to this person, this concept, this idea. You can still feel a nativist pull towards something else. That's how it is to be. That's how it is to live. Like you can be a person that knows vengeance is wrong and you still want revenge.
Right.
So with Jefferson in particular, I wanted to kind of uncork the bottle a little bit and make him more contemporary, I suppose. Kind of the same thing with Katana. Like I love that character and this kind of all the push and pull, all the different kind of energies going on. The the mantle that she's adopted, you know, kind of Bushido in the modern era, you know, being in love with a man whose soul is in the blade that you carry. Like, there's so many cool things there. But I also wanted Tatsu to be a woman, right? Like, you don't want her to just be, she's mysterious and she crouches on the edge of the building and says something cool and then leaps down with the sword, right? Like, yeah, she does that, but she's also a person.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was a big thing for me in the book, you know, like, is making sure that if she's not wearing the costume and she doesn't have the sword, there's a character there to explore who's interesting, who's thoughtful, who has her own like kind of wants and needs and philosophies, who might be a little lonely. I mean, the idea of I am always near the man that I love, and yet I am always alone. But that's interesting, right? Like that, you know, that's the stuff of poetry, you know, like you can do a lot with that, right? So, I don't always do it properly or correctly, or, you know, and I can be more successful at certain attempts I make, but like, I always like to try them. And my hope is that I put some things in there, or not even like put new things in as much as I kind of reveal what I think is already there that maybe like we don't deal with a lot. And then, you know, whenever the time comes and I'm away from it and someone else comes in, they have more they can draw from. And someone can say, you know what, I really want to do this love story thing here. Like, this is interesting to me. Or I want to see what happens when Jefferson gets dark, you know, and see what happens. Or I want to see Cassandra influence Lady Shiva for once, you know, right? What does that do? What does Cassandra do for Shiva rather than what Shiva can do to Cassandra, right? So like, you know, all of these things are there to play with in fiction, and that's kind of why the reason I like to do it.
Well, I mean, you're doing it right, my friend. I mean, if that's any sort of consolation, I mean, it's those complexities that make essentially, you know, DC represents this sort of pantheon of American gods, and it's the complexity of their human side that makes them accessible to a reader. You know, even Superman, you know, the big complaint about him is, you know, he represents entirely an ideal, and sure, that's part of what makes him such a powerful symbol in pop culture and in the world. But, you know, it's those stories that break down the sort of difficulty of that situation, right? The thing that I loved about Peter Tomasi's Superman was making him a dad, making Superman, you know, putting him in an entirely different situation where he is more intimately in contact with somebody that he is trying to affect for the positive. And I see sort of aspects of that reflected in Jefferson and the way that he's interacting with the younger outsiders. And even with, you know, this really great relationship between Batman and Jefferson, there's this wonderful balance between those two characters that I find incredibly compelling in the way that, you know, the thing that sort of makes, or that keys us into how important and how strong of a character Jefferson is that even Batman acknowledges him pretty much as an equal, right? Like, Batman will always be sort of emotionally removed and will withhold information until he finds it necessary. But in the way that he interacts with Jefferson and the amount of trust that he puts into him, you immediately get keyed into just how special this character is, right? I mean, if the goddamn Batman trusts this guy to help sort of nurture this new generation of heroes and to sort of lead aspects of his operations, what does that say about him? And then obviously the way that you write Jefferson kind of runs with that, and it pushes that forward. And, you know, when you bring up the relationship between him and Tatsu, I love the fact that, you know, you're talking about these almost Shakespearean romantics, you know, between Tatsu and her husband, and now this burgeoning relationship with Jefferson. By the way, I get a very Kurosawa vibe from the all the stuff you're doing with Tatsu, even visually, like that I think it was an annual where she goes inside the blade itself.
Oh, sure. Well, you know, I mean, she's, you know, kind of thinking about like cinematic kind of samurai stuff, and Kurosawa is a big influence on me in general. You know, like even thinking about like Junji Ito's, you know, manga work, and Tsutomu Nihei's, you know, manga work. And I mean, you know, when Jefferson and Batman are interesting to me because Jefferson just refuses to buy into the theater of Batman.
Yeah.
He's just not going to buy into it. Like, he respects it. I get it. I get why you do that. But I'm not buying into that. Like, I'm always talking to Bruce. I'll call you Batman when you're dressed up like Batman, but I'm always talking to Bruce. Like, I don't have to play the game that every other hero seems to play with you, where they all get like kind of brought into your psychosis, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so he's like, yeah, I'm going to relate to you as a dude. You know, one of the first real conversations they had was Jefferson telling Bruce Wayne, like, by the way, your parents' death isn't your fault. You know, and for Jefferson, it's simple math. Once he realizes, like, oh, wait a minute, your parents got killed in an alleyway, and that's why all this started, right? And to him, it's ludicrous. Not that Batman is ludicrous, but it's ludicrous for Bruce to think that was his fault.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, and Jefferson looked at it and he's thinking to himself, if part of you thinks that you're to blame for what happened to your parents, that's insane. You were a kid, dude. Like, that's basically what he's trying to say, you know? Because Jeff just sees things, you know, in that way. Because he deals with not Bruce Wayne, billionaire Batman, but he deals with traumatized kids all the time.
Mm.
Every day. That's his job. His job is to remind kids that it's not their fault. Your parents an asshole. That's not your fault. You're in an abusive situation. That's not your fault.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you know, you didn't grow up with a lot. You're struggling to make it. Not your fault. Right? Not your fault is sort of like his raison d'etre.
Mm.
Because in order for him to do his job as an educator, people have to stop blaming themselves for the situations and then realize, like, there's no inherent shame to it. You just have to figure out a way out, right? So he looks at Batman as like, oh, that's what happens when, like, a really rich kid goes through some terrible things and no one has enough sense to tell him no. And it's, you know, and Batman is cool. Like, you know, he recognizes the good that Batman can do, but he's also wary of, like, don't spread that to these kids, though, man.
Yeah.
You know, we don't need to be handing down shame generation to generation.
I think though, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like your Batman does sort of acknowledge that. You know, I think
Bruce is very self-aware. Like, Bruce knows that what works for him can't work for everybody. He knows that Jefferson can relate to them in a way that he's not very good at doing.
Yeah.
He also looks at Jefferson and says, you know, you could be a lot more. You know, like, just you know, just to tell you, like, you have an incredibly strong power, a near elemental power. You know, you can be more than a local if you want. And that's a big part of Outsiders is Jefferson realizing a little bit of his potential.
And I think part of it too is, and the thing that I think makes Batman so willing to accept that is that behind the powers, the man that is Jefferson Pierce is, I don't want to say unyielding, but his personality and the amount of good that he can do in the way that he sort of interprets the world is just as elemental as his powers to me.
Well, you know, I was a teacher for a little while, like just a substitute teacher. I have a lot of respect for the profession. I wanted to honor that. And I'm just kind of fascinated with a guy that he cares about the one life and, like, all the lives, you know? Mm-hmm. And he has godlike power, but he's focused on being a man.
Mm.
That's really interesting. Really interesting thing to explore, especially when you have a man that essentially doesn't really have any superpowers, who's got a lot of theater on his side.
Yep.
To give him the effect, Jefferson innately creates awe just by using his powers. He's walking awe, right? So I think part of Bruce is looking at that being like, man, like if I had lightning powers, woo, you know, things would be a little different, right? But yeah, I mean, it's kind of in a kind of macro sense. It's, you know, one of the first things I did when I worked on the book was sit down and just think about what do they talk about? I just kind of imagine Bruce Wayne and Jefferson Pierce sitting down, having coffee. What's the conversation? And I'll just let it play out in my head. And I do that a lot with characters when I'm trying to figure them out. Before I kind of get into like the plot of the rest of it, I just need them to kind of get together and be with each other. Yeah. And that's how I figure out how they relate, you know, like sit Tatsu down with Cassandra, have them go for a jog. What are they talking about on their jog? You know, like sometimes thinking about the little slice of life moments, which probably happen within the narrative world, you just won't see them. But thinking about them helps me kind of fully realize it. Oh, my alarm's going off. I do have to go. Okay. Because once I have to get out of here and get to dinner and the rest of it. But if there's any last thing I can cover, I got like.
Sure. Yeah. I guess we'll shotgun a couple of these live questions and then, cool. You know, we will be free. Skip and Tosh wants to know what your favorite genre to write is besides cyberpunk.
Well, it's funny. I've never actually written cyberpunk. Well, no, not true. I wrote Aphrodite 5. That is technically cyberpunk. It's about corporate malfeasance and a cyborg, so count it. Oh man, horror is probably really interesting to me, but it depends on what I'm in the mood in. You know, like generally character-driven genre storytelling is my jam. So sci-fi, action, adventure, action, thriller, horror, like that kind of stuff. I have tried to write a romantic comedy once, and it was fun to do, but I don't think I could do it very well for like, you know, a profession. Straight comedy is difficult for me. I'm not particularly funny. Not in that way. I got a writer friend of mine, Dan Ewan. He wrote Playing with Fire, that John Cena fireman picture. And he's one of the funniest people I've ever met in my life. Like he's just pure comedy on two legs. I am not. So that, you know, is probably not a natural fit for me. Cyberpunk, really, I mean, I've been into it for a while, but I'm digging more into futurism and technology. And I don't know, maybe it's just a general dissatisfaction with the present as my eyes turn towards the future these days. That might be it. You know, it's been kind of an unpleasant existence over the past 6 months or so. You know, some would say, you know, since 2016, depending on which way you fall, right? And so, I think I've been thinking more about how do we get out of this? Where are we going with this? You know? And so Cyberpunk is feeling, although I always enjoyed it as a kid, it's feeling more predictive than it did before, you know, more current, you know, the kind of, not the individual bits of technology, but just the way life is valued, the power of corporations, the role of government, you know, authority, social mobility, like those kind of dystopian aspects of that fiction are feeling more and more like a snapshot of many people's reality. And so that has brought me, I think, closer to that genre. And then my natural fascination with technology and what it can do and how technology affects us, interpersonal relationships. That's kind of the space I've been in.
That makes a lot of sense. We have another question. Comic Boom wants to know, what do you think is the biggest lesson that Shiva can learn from her daughter?
How to reconcile. Although Shiva can seem indifferent in many ways, I think that underneath it is a desire for the world to make sense in a way the world might not. And I think Cassandra has reconciled with the world with a capital W may never be what we want it to be, but the small battles still matter.
Yeah.
I think Cassandra finds benefit in the smaller victories. Shiva doesn't, I think. And I think that could be something that she could learn from her daughter.
Yeah, I think in a way Shiva kind of tries to cut through it with her sword, whereas literally Cassandra's learning to kind of dance with it and find her own footing.
Yeah. I mean, part of what makes Shiva so excellent is her kind of macrocosmic look at the world, right? But sometimes you can't affect it in a macrocosmic way. You can only affect it in a microcosmic way. So you know, you got to focus on the good that you can do in the moment.
Absolutely. Samoki Dude wants to know, how is or was American Carnage? And I would definitely invite you to look at the first hour of this conversation because It's a lot about how excellent it was.
It'll melt your face with crime and thriller stuff.
And things.
It's all right. Absolutely. It's all right. Okay. You know,
it's best book of 2019.
But like it's worth the cover price, brother. So that
100% agree. 100% agree. Comic Boom wants to know, now that Batman is broke, how will that affect his relationship with the outsiders, if at all?
Are rich people ever really broke?
That's true.
Really?
That's true.
Really?
Fair.
Broke is different. When you're a billionaire, broke is different.
That's fair. Also true. And our final kind of comment from Aaron VO. Not a question, but I just want to thank you, DKN and Bryan. The chemistry between you two always leads to such great interviews, conversations. Always a pleasure getting to sit on your chats. I appreciate that, man. Any excuse to sit down and talk with Bryan is an absolute pleasure, and I do not take it for granted.
Oh, well, I'm always happy to be here. And thank you everyone for who tuned in the moment. Appreciate that. And everyone who tunes in later also appreciate you. This is me appreciating you from the past to the future. And follow my guy on Twitter and follow him on social media wherever he is. And feel free to contact me on Twitter. Is basically where I do most of my social media stuff. It's at Bryan Edward Hill. It's in tags and stuff down here, so you would see it.
Down there.
So down there. So holler at me. I need like a cool social media sign off thing. Like Young Yeah has a cool one. You ever watch that guy, the video game guy? Like he has a really good one. I need something. I gotta find some and we'll see you over the hill, or that's terrible. But we'll find a thing. I'll find a thing.
Yeah. Bryan is definitely a great Twitter follow, both for the sort of education on the world perspective, the comedy of it all. So make sure you guys go check him out. There's a link to his Twitter in the description. Otherwise, if you feel like being methodical and mechanical, you can type it. There's a display of his Twitter handle down below. And I want to thank everybody who's watching this live for joining us and for being a part of the conversation, and for everybody who's going to be watching this after the fact. And of course, Bryan, man, it is always an absolute joy. I feel like I learn more every time I have a conversation with you. And I want to thank you for the way that you're crafting these stories, because you are both doing the things that do the sort of superhero genre proud, but deep down at its core, you're telling stories about people and about aspects of the world we live in. And that totally bleeds through everything you do. And I think that is the mark of an incredible storyteller. So as a fan, as a reader, as an aspiring writer, I want to thank you for not only executing, but setting an example for people like me who want to be in that position to tell our stories.
Oh, I appreciate that, man. And hopefully, the best thing that any writer can do is help make more writers. So, if my work is helpful in that way, then I genuinely appreciate it, and appreciate everyone who's tuning in. Be careful out there. Please stay safe. Just take care of yourselves. I want everyone healthy, and we're going to get through this. And if you're kind of having a bad time during this, just don't feel alone. A lot of people are, and we'll all make it. But all right, I will talk to you all later, I suppose.
Absolutely.
Will Dr. Strange teleport out of the studio?
All right, guys, this is going to be Dark Knight Nation and Bryan Hill signing out for the broadcast. Thanks again for watching.
All right.